But it is good. So, for those who have been here for some time and regulars now, we know that we're looking through the book of Hebrews. And there have been some very excellent teaching from this book. I know there are some that I've yet to put up on my YouTube channel and things like that, and that will happen. But make sure that you look back and see what other people have taught. And today we're looking at Hebrews 7. But I think when we look at this chapter, it's going to help us if we step back and remind ourselves again who the author was speaking to and why. If we don't do that, we will get confused and we will scratch our heads and go, what the heck was he talking about? So, the book of Hebrews was written by a Jewish person, we're assuming, who had a Greek heritage. And he was writing to Jewish Christians who were struggling in many ways. Now, they were Jews who were coming out of Judaism to embrace this new way of Jesus Christ. During that time, we need to remember that there were many other cults or sects or teachings at the edge of the church, such as the Ebionites were, just for example, one group. And these were Jewish Christians who refused to abandon Jewish customs that they had been brought up in, and rites and festivals and those sorts of things like that. They regarded Jesus of Nazareth as the Messiah while rejecting his divinity, his virgin birth, and insisted on the necessity of following all the old law and rites and things like that. So you can see that that's just one example of what the readers were having to deal with, because they were hearing all these things coming from different sides. And the problem also was the fact that those who professed to be Christian were not popular at all where they were. So you had all the Jewish leaders who, wasn't that long ago, crucified Christ for saying he was the Messiah. Did they suddenly all turn happy afterwards and go, oh, well, we made a mistake and that was it? Of course not. Look at Paul, who used to be Saul, as a great example of how the Jewish community were against the Christians of the day. So there was great persecution from within their community. There was also great persecution from outside of the community within the Roman Empire themselves. The Roman guys, they tolerated the Jews because they were at least loyal to, or so it seemed, to the Roman Empire. As Celsus put it, the religion of the Jews may be highly peculiar, but it is at least the custom of their fathers. So the Romans took, in some respects, weight to organised religion if they could show that it's something that all their ancestors followed. And so therefore they needed to continue to follow it because that was what their ancestors did. But early Christians could not offer any such defence. And so Christianity was also then remained illegal, and they're at the mercy of those within the Roman Empire. So the readers were doubting that Jesus was better than the system which they had grown up with. They were ingrained for many generations, and they saw that if they actually stayed within that system, the persecution and other things would lessen. So the author of Hebrews had to start at the beginning to encourage its readers to not just believe, but to stand firm and grow, because God has met and will continue to meet their needs through Jesus, who is their high priest. So not through the law, not through the old system, not through the old covenant. It was all changed. It was all new. So that's the background again of Hebrews. So at the end of chapter 6, which Dave spoke about last week, and then into chapter 7, the writer talks about a priest and a king called Melchizedek. Now, I was saddened to hear that David didn't unpack who Melchizedek was and deal with all the complexities of Melchizedek. It was in his chapter. It started there. Instead, he left it with me. So that's what we're going to look at today. The thing is, we don't know a lot about Melchizedek. And so there's a bit of mystery surrounding this guy. We know that he was the king of Salem. We know that he was a priest of the Most High God. We know that he has a funny name. And we know that Abraham thought enough of him that he actually gave him a tenth of all he had. So it's actually the first recorded time that someone gave a tithe or a tenth to the high priest on behalf of God. He's first mentioned in Genesis 14, which reads, "Then Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine," which some people also said is a precursor to communion as well. "He was a priest of God Most High, and he blessed Abram, saying, 'Blessed be Abram by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth, and praise be to God Most High, who delivered your enemies into your hand.' Then Abram gave him a tenth of everything." Now, he's not mentioned again until Psalm 110, verse 4, where David makes reference to the coming Messiah and writes, "You are a priest forever in the line of Melchizedek." So, he's now not mentioned again in Proverbs, Ecclesiastics, none of the prophets talk about him. They don't talk about him in the Gospels. Paul mentions nothing about him in Acts or in his letters to the churches or in the teaching letters. And then suddenly in the book of Hebrews, this guy writes all about the mystery king, drawing some comparisons between Melchizedek and Jesus. Just for those who want to know, if you break down the word Melchizedek, Melchizedek in Hebrew means righteousness. And he was the king of Salem, which means peace. In verse 3 in chapter 7, he says, "He was without father or mother or genealogy, having neither beginning days nor end of life, but resembling the Son of God, he continues a priest forever." This is important for those who are hearing that message. So remember, the writer is writing to Jewish Christians who were brought up in the Jewish system under priests from the tribe of Levi. Without genealogy is as important as recording someone's genealogy, because if you're a priest from the tribe of Levi, your status was there because you could trace your genealogy all the way back to Abram. If you could not show who you came from, if you couldn't show that you're from the tribe of Levi, you could not become a priest. So it's important, but yet Melchizedek's, I'll get his name right, that's why it's a funny word, Mel, I'll just call him Mel for short. His death was not recorded. His birth was not recorded. We don't know where he came from. Yes, he had parents. Yes, he died. He wasn't immortal. But what is left out is as important as what is written. So Melchizedek is a type of Jesus in that respect. Some used to think that Melchizedek was a pre-incarnate Christ. But I personally don't believe so, because it says in verse 3 that he resembles, not that he was. He resembles the Son of God. So, why did the writer of Hebrews make the effort to talk about this mystery king? Remember, the Old Testament priests became priests simply because by right of succession. My father was a priest, my grandfather was a priest, his grandfather was a priest, and so therefore I am a priest. Historian Josephus estimated that 81 high priests served from Aaron to when the temple was destroyed in 70 AD. So they were prided themselves on knowing where someone came from. And the reason there were priests in the Old Testament time is that they were the guys who interceded for us with God. That was meant to be the role of the priest. They were the only ones who could enter the holy place once a year on our behalf. No one else was allowed to go. And they would take sacrifices to that place so that our sins will be forgiven. All of that Old Testament priestly system was meant to teach us about our sin, and the holiness and the wrath of God, and an inescapable judgment that is coming on us. But as mentioned, Melchizedek wasn't from the tribe of Levi. In fact, he had nothing to do with this or any other tribe. But he's still called a high priest. So Melchizedek was the first and the last in that lineage of priests in his name. So he wasn't from anything else. That was it. He was it. Reading from verse 11 in chapter 7. If perfection could have been attained through the Levitical priesthood, and indeed the law given to the people established that priesthood, why was there still need for another priest to come, one in the order of Melchizedek, and not in the order of Aaron? For when the priesthood is changed, the law must be changed also. He of whom these things have said he of whom these things are said belonged to a different tribe, and no one from that tribe has ever served at the altar. For it is clear that our law descended from Judah, and in regard to that tribe Moses said nothing about priests. Yet what we have said is even more clear if another priest like Melchizedek appears, one who's become a priest not on the basis of a regulation as to his ancestry, but on the basis of the power of an indestructible life. For it is declared, you are a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek. The former regulation is set aside because it was weak and useless, for the law made nothing perfect. And a better hope is introduced by which we draw near to God. The law was weak and useless, made nothing perfect. So what the priests from Aaron's lineage were doing wasn't good enough. God is saying nothing has worked so far. You've had the laws, you've had the priests, you've had the traditions, the sacrifices, and the festivals, but it wasn't enough. The Ebionites are wrong. The Gnostics, with all their search for knowledge and higher plane existence, are wrong. The truth is that God requires perfection, and you have failed. And this is why Jesus had to come and stand in your place as your high priest. In verse 26 it says, such a high priest truly meets our need, one who is holy, blameless, pure, set apart from sinners, exalted above the heavens. Unlike the other high priests, he does not need to offer sacrifices day after day, first for his own sins and then for the sins of the people. He sacrificed for their sins once and for all when he offered himself. The writer of Hebrews is trying to reinforce that message that there's a massive difference between Jesus and all the other priests within the Jewish system. The old priests refused to touch anything that was unclean. Jesus would touch the unclean to make holy. So the reason for all this talk about Christ's relation to Melchizedek in this chapter is because the eternal, superior priesthood of Jesus is our only hope for eternal salvation. God's wrath never changes. There is only one hope for sinners like us. We must have a faithful high priest who will intercede for us forever. I believe that there are a lot of parallels between those who received that original letter from the writer of Hebrews and ourselves today. Just like the Christians back then who were facing the persecution, we are also in an age of persecution. Christianity is facing persecution on a global scale that continues to increase. A recent report in British press said this, and it came out in 2018. The Pew Research Centre report, which analysed religious freedom in 198 countries and territories, revealed religious antagonism saw its biggest surge over a decade in 2016 with Christians. They were ranked number one. There was noted, now they looked at 198 countries. Out of that 198 countries, 144 countries persecute Christians in one way or another. That's a massively high percentage, isn't it? We are also dealing with, in an unprecedented scale, heresies, fake theologies, half-truths pushed within our mainstream churches today. I shared at our Easter service and yesterday at the service for Emmaus that in Britain, a quarter of the people who describe themselves as Christian do not believe in the resurrection of Christ. 3 in 10 Christians surveyed said they did not believe in life after death. Maybe we need to be the ones that must be reminded that Jesus is the only way that we can be truly saved from death because of our sin. Verse 25. Therefore, he is able to save completely those who come to God through him, because he always lives to intercede for them. Some versions say that he's able to save utterly or completely or forever. I'm the way, the truth, and the light. No one comes to the Father but through me. And I think that message is being lost, isn't it? This means, but because we are saved completely, forever, that we should not talk about our salvation in a static term in the way that I think we often do. It's as if I did something once in an act of decision, and Christ did something once when he died and rose again, and that's all there is to it. A historical event, something once. Nothing is static. I need to daily submit myself to God, daily recognise that he is Lord, and I would not have life if it was not for him. Because Jesus, right at this moment, is interceding on behalf of you and me. Philip Yancey, in his book on prayer, says, the New Testament's only glimpse of what Jesus is doing right now depicts him at the right hand of God, interceding for us. In 3 years of active ministry, Jesus changed the moral landscape of the planet. For nearly 2,000 years since, he's been using another tactic: prayer. What could that look like? In Luke 22, Jesus says to Peter, Simon, Simon, behold, Satan has demanded permission to sift you like wheat. But I have prayed for you that your faith may not fail, and you, once you have turned again, strengthen your brothers. So Jesus was already interceding for Peter while he was on earth. And he was so confident in his prayer for Peter that he said, once you have turned, not if you turn again. So even though Peter stumbled in his denial, his faith did not fail. And I like that. He's got faith in us, hasn't he? And he prays for us, knowing that the Spirit is able to work with us. We're never given up. There's a great communion to it. We've never given up on. Pastor Bruce Tillman once said, "Quite frankly, I'm sick to death of ideals. I have so many ideals and I've been so frustrated by them. I really don't care for anymore. What I'm looking for is a saviour. Not someone who will just tell me what I ought to be, but someone who will forgive me for what I am, and then his very love will enable me to be more than I ever believed I could be." It's exactly that Jesus does. Those hearing that message in Hebrews had to be reminded that Jesus is like no one else. He's like nothing else that they know, that they've grown up with, anything. You can't give him validity because his father was a priest. He is who he is, and that is it. Melchizedek was him who he was. They could not trace his lineage. He died. They knew nothing more about him again. But he was the high priest. Jesus is our high priest. And I don't know about you. There's a certain peace inside me because I know that my high priest, that Christ intercedes for me forever. That he will not give up on me, no matter what. You see, when I get caught up in my failings, I feel shame when I fall away from God. I'm so far from perfect that if you really knew me, you'd probably sack me on the spot. At times I've struggled as a father, as a husband, and a son. At times people irritate me, and I don't deal with this well. I can be very task-focused and at times struggle to display warmth and joy. My walk with Christ has struggled at times. There have been periods in my life that my rebellion against God was great, which then affected those around me. Some days I'm so close to him, and yet there are other days when God never once enters my mind. I never feel like that I'm enough, because I'm not enough. Only Jesus is enough. Thank God he's always